Hey, Mike and Adriel, this is Luke from Michigan. I have a question for you about church history. Been really getting into church history recently, and one of the things I've been reading about is the Council of Nicaea, where we get the Nicene Creed. And I was also struck by how these church fathers who were debating and talking and trying to get through the Nicene Creed, trying to write this out and hammer everything out, all the details, that they were also debating things like, what's the proper date of Easter? This really struck me as an odd debate to have. Is having a specific date, prescribed date for the celebration of Easter, that important? Is that something that should be left up to the local church? Is that something that that Christians should even be concerned about at all, the specific date of Easter? I'm just kind of curious why this was such a hot debate and why they made the decision they did. Thank you. Bye.
Luke, thanks for your question. Let me just say, too, for those of you who are not familiar with what the Council of Nicaea was or when it was in 325 A.D., right, Mike? Mm-hmm. And it was really about dealing with some really serious problems in the church at that time, in particular, a group of people that was teaching that Jesus was a created being. They were called the Arians. And so there was this church council that was called together that was really trying to uphold the teaching of Scripture. And as you said there, Luke, there were some of the things related to the doctrine of Christ, Christology that were being discussed, the doctrine of the Trinity, but they were also talking about some other things that really became a stumbling block for the ancient church. And the stuff related to the doctrine of Christ, right? The Council of Nicaea worked so hard on. That is really important. It's core Christianity. Churches don't get to decide whether they want to accept that or not. Celebrating Easter on a particular day, I don't think that the Scriptures really emphasize the particular day on the calendar. In fact, the Apostle Paul said, one person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind, Romans 14, verse 5. Really, every Lord's Day is meant to be a proclamation of Christ's victory over death. That is to say, every time we gather together for worship on Sunday, his resurrection, Jesus' resurrection, that's why the early church started meeting on Sundays, in fact, instead of Saturday, the traditional Sabbath day. Now, the Western Church and the Eastern Church operated on the basis of two different calendar systems. So to this day, Eastern Orthodox Christians often celebrate Easter on a day that is different from the one that many of us in the Western Church celebrate Easter on. The important thing, however, is that Jesus actually bodily rose from the dead. I think that sometimes we can get so distracted by peripheral questions that we often miss the main thing. And if you want a great passage in the Bible to go to that really hones in on the main thing when it comes to Easter, it's 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Because Jesus conquered death, you and I have the hope that one day our bodies will also rise from the grave. So the historical reality of Easter is more important than I think getting the date right. Like, what would you say?
Yeah, it's interesting that really in the early 2nd century, you have Polycarp, who was the disciple of the Apostle John, coming to Rome, where they celebrated Easter on a different day. And they were having a debate about this, and the churches were all in an uproar, whether you celebrated on the Eastern date or the Western date. And Polycarp said, look, I knew John, the apostle. It is the Eastern date, but let's not, this is a matter of indifference for the church. Let's not divide over this date. What's interesting is later in the church, you really get mired in these debates. Early on, there were people like Polycarp who were saying what you're saying, Adriel. Hey, this is, can we say every time we gather on the Lord's Day, we're celebrating the resurrection of Christ? Should we really divide over the date of Easter, or unite on the reality of Easter and proclaim that to the world?
I love it when people compare me to Polycarp. So thank you for that, Mike.
Absolutely.
I just, someone would be like.
Can you imagine naming your child Polycarp?
No, I can't.
I shouldn't say that because
there might be a couple
actually,
Polycarps
I think that
listening.
there are probably a few Polycarps listening.
You're listening to The Core, and if your name is Polycarp, I'm sorry.
Yes.
We're answering your questions about the Christian faith. I'm with Professor Michael Horton. I'm Pastor Adriel Sanchez. If you have a question, give us a call. The number is 1-833-843-2673. That's 1-833-THE-CORE. You can also email your question into us at questions@corechristianity.com. We want to let you know about a special offer that we have for you today. probably aren't too many Polycarps out there. I don't know.
No, in fact, can I go back and just tack something onto that? Yeah, it was interesting. Without going into detail here, I just got back from Milan, Italy, and one of the things that I saw while I was there that was really fascinating was the tomb of Constantine's son, who was an Arian. That is, taught that Jesus was the first creature, as you were saying, the whole reason for the Nicene Creed. And so when people say, this is important, when Mormons and others come to you, Jehovah's Witnesses, and they say that the Nicene Council met in 325 because the Emperor Constantine basically rammed it down everybody's throat, and that's the first time we have it taught that Jesus is God. That just isn't true. Constantine himself just wanted everybody to get along. That's why he called the council. And it's surprising that the council, in spite of some of the things Constantine held, the council ruled so clearly against the Arians. And his own son tried to get the Nicene Council, the conclusions of the Nicene Council undone, and he failed. So it's not because of secular power that we have the Nicene Creed. It's in spite of it.
That's a great point.